Recording lights on. Friends, welcome to a really special tasting. I'm so excited. We have an extra special lineup tonight in celebration of Mother's Day. And before I get too carried away with everything, I want to thank and say special shout outs to all the Mongers moms on tonight's call. So a special thank you and hello to Wendy, Elisa, Nancy, to Jamie, and to some of the first time Mother's Day celebrations to Megan and Allie. So we're so excited tonight to delve through some really amazing products, to talk through a unique and, dare I say, ambitious type of a pairing where we actually kind of go by course and do some really intense pairings, and have fun as always. Learn something about some food, hear some stories about the stuff, and kind of make connections. Before I get carried away, my name is Zach Berg, for anybody who I have not personally met, and I am the head cheesemonger, the co-owner of Mongers Provisions. We have a couple really special people on the call, such as Benji Klein, the monger behind the Monger, and Will, and we have a special guest, Corinne, from Askanya Chocolate. So without any further ado, yeah, just to kind of give you a little sense of the mechanics of tonight, because it's different than some of our other tastings, if any of you have been to them. Tonight is designed where each one's a course, right? So we're going to try them per usual. I encourage you to try everything. Enjoy yourself. Don't wait for us, because you know I like to talk. But make sure you leave a little bit of anything. So when you get to it, we're not like, oh, I can't try it with that chocolate. I ate all of that chocolate. But go ahead and nibble and try to meet the cast of characters on their own, right? All the chocolates on their own, all the cheeses on their own. So when we start pairing, you kind of have a better sense of things. Does anybody have early questions? Beautiful. Remember, you can use the chat to ask questions, and Will and Benji will have eyes on that, and they'll feed us any questions that should be brought to the group's attention. And otherwise, if you feel comfortable unmute yourself at any point. This is always so much more fun when it's a conversation. And so we're really excited to connect with everybody across this virtual table, and hopefully connect you to some really cool producers. The wine tonight, we only have one, and it's really beautiful. I was, before I talk about the wine, a special shout out to the team that really helped tonight's pairings. I kind of gave some rough guidelines and ideas, but the team, Lena, Kim, Matthew, all the Mongers, we really continue to earn that plural possessive S that our name has. They did all the dialing in and really coming up with the specifics of some awesome pairings. And then Lena and I got to taste these wines, and we have such bold flavors. The wine, we were looking for like pretty background music at first. And it was fun when we tried this Riesling. It added something in a provocative way that I was curious was even possible, because there's so much flavors going on. But I think this Riesling's awesome. Often when it comes to our wines, I aim for that hand harvested. I think it makes a big difference. And this is an example of like a lot of flavor in a really beautiful wine that I think is going to bring out some cool things for these pairings. Am I forgetting anything in terms of housekeeping, gang? I feel like I ran through that.
I think you are good.
We're good? Okay. Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay. We ready for course one then? Let's do it. The first cheese we're going to try to, guys, is this beautiful Italian cheese. Il Nocciolo. I've been saying this wrong all day. So, of course, Il Nocciolo. This beautiful marshmallow cheese is what I'm going to call it, because I can say that really easily, is coming from the Piedmont. And it's a robiola. So it's this most delicate little Italian softie. And it's a blend of all three milks. And I think the texture on this cheese is very, very fun. I've been wanting to play with it for a while. And we're pairing it tonight with a really special chocolate. And I'm going to let Will talk about chocolate and introduce our special guest, who's going to tell us really the inside track on this chocolate in the way that we just wouldn't be able to. But go ahead and try your robiola. And while we're trying everything, like I said earlier, make sure you try everything in isolation before we get too caught up in the pairings, because the flavors are going to get wild. I really want you guys to, kind of like in our classic tastings, try things on their own, and then we'll put them together and talk about how it changes those things. But Will, do you want to tell us about the first chocolate?
So the first chocolate is the Askanya Bouquet Vert. My French pronunciation is worse than many of my other pronunciations. So Corinne, feel free to help me out.
You were perfect.
And we, when we were going through trying to sort this out and pick the tastings, we had picked the Nocciolo for one of the cheeses, but we had the idea to pair it with Askanya, and the team was trying it with the Askanya Wanganeges, which is a really delicious chocolate bar that Corinne makes, and it's made with Haitian sugar called rapadou. That's kind of an unrefined sugar, and it's got this like wonderful, slightly gritty texture and a little bit of molasses notes to it. But in tasting like the texture of this cheese, it's so soft and fluffy. I was like, you know, why don't we try it with the newer bar that Askanya's got out and make a little bit of a key lime pie sort of idea. And it ended up being a really, really nice pairing. We've loved carrying Askanya for, I think this is the fourth Mother's Day that we've carried Askanya. So it's exciting for us. I think we introduced Askanya right before Mother's Day, I think in 2017, 2018. And it's been something that we've loved to carry. We love what Corinne does. And
can you get a bar of each?
What's that?
No, go ahead.
I will let her tell you a little bit more about the company and what they do.
Thank you, Will, for this beautiful introduction. And I'm glad that this is not the first time you're having Askanya, and it's such a great pairing, not only for the taste, but also by the fact that the bar were made by women who are also mom, because all the chocolate makers at our chocolate factory in Haiti, it's in a small town called Wanamint, are women. And we were just thinking there were two of them, me and another one who don't have children. So it's interesting that this bar was chosen for Mother's Day for other moms to enjoy. And also my story behind, I'm Haitian American. I went to University of Michigan, go Blues. So I was very excited also that Mongers was the first Michigan place to carry our chocolate. Anyway, when I started the chocolate factory, the reason why I did it is because I wanted to make a difference. I didn't want to only do charity. So I wanted to have a business in Haiti where I could use my skill, but that would make an impact on farmers. So buy cocoa and whatever, and ingredients from the farmers. Right now, we work with about a total of 3,000 farmers who provide us the cocoa, the sugar. Will mention the artisanal cane sugar that we use, unrefined sugar, the lime that is in this bar, and also cashew nut for a new flavor coming up. So I'm excited that we can work with about 3,000 farmers to do that. And the second thing I wanted to do is to create blue collar jobs especially for women. Hence the reason like all the chocolate makers are women, all 8 of them. And we all, even on our social media team, our graphic designer, our bookkeeper, they're all Haitian American or Haitian women, either in Haiti or in France, or even Mexico. So we also promote a lot of women. And the other thing I wanted to do was to be able to create opportunity outside of the capital, Port-au-Prince. You might be familiar with Port-au-Prince because that was the epicenter of the earthquake. But there's more of Haiti than Port-au-Prince, hence the reason that why the chocolate factory is located in that small town Wanamint in Northeast Haiti, which is about 8 hours away. So I'm not gonna take too much time. I think this is a fabulous bar. As Will said, it has lime, so it made it kind of a key lime pie flavor. The lime comes from more of the center west of Haiti, and the cocoa from the northern. And in terms of flavor note, it really gives you that limey taste. So it is pretty strong dark. So it has dark cocoa flavor, that chocolatey flavor, but with that limey taste, like, or would you say it differently?
I think that works. I mean, it's pretty fruity, and I love the lime flavor coming through in there. And just out of curiosity, about how many tons of cacao do you buy, in a year?
So it's interesting because we also started our own fermentation and drying center, so we can control. So we buy from farmers, but directly cocoa that has been fermented and dried. So they will look like this. That there will be the cocoa bean that gets used. But we also, out of the farmer, we also work with a group of farmers, 500 of them, who we get the wet beans, so the white beans that we ferment and dry. So we use some of it for Askanya, and the rest we export. And some of the chocolatiers, US based, that use our bean, Crew Chocolate in Oakland, California, Bisou Chocolate also in Oakland, California. We have Monarch Chocolate in Canada. So we've been buying under 5 tons, so that would be 5,000 kilo or 10,000 pound of cocoa. But but let's not forget that the yield is 30%. So for every kilo of finished pound of finished cocoa we've actually bought 3 kilos of wet beans. So the impact is pretty real for the farmers. So long story short, like, we buy about 5 tons, so 5,000 kilo or about 10,000 pounds.
Yeah, that's amazing in terms of dollars, just so, everybody knows. I don't know, what prices exactly you're paying right now, Corinne, but, if she's paying close to double, commodity prices for the cacao, that's an enormous amount of money going back to Haitian farmers. When you break it down, 5,000 tons doesn't sound like a lot of us, but when you think about a ton of cacao going for, $2,000, give or take, on commodity prices, doubling that in a country with, a per capita GDP of $800 or so, right?
Yes.
It's an enormous benefit. So
yes. So what
really
I
cool
will
what you do.
say, yes, and then let's say on the market, so we pay about $3.45 per kilo of finished fermented dry cacao, whereas on the market it goes for, other people pay about 50 cents. So we are paying $3.45. So that's about seven times the going rate. And the reason why I do that is because I didn't want to just pay the price, the going rate, but I wanted to provide a living wage so that all our farmers have enough money to send their kids to school, to pay their bills. And one thing we realized is, like, in our area where we go, we don't have child labor, we don't have child slavery, because every kid is at school because we pay them enough money so the farmer can live. So we've really been enforcing not the minimum wage, but a living wage.
That's amazing. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'd love to hear your feedback on some of the other pairings as we taste through a little further.
We do actually have a question for you, Corinne. We got a question in the chat. Is there a story behind the name of the chocolate?
Yeah, there is a story behind the name of the chocolate. So when I started the business, I was already married. My husband is German, and we were living in New York. So I told him I had to go back to Haiti and create a business. And that was a decision I made even before we get married. So he said, okay, I have no problem with you doing the business, but I have 2 conditions. One, you have to be at least home in New York 6 months per year. And so now I'm in Brooklyn, New York. And second, the business needs to be called like my hometown in Germany. So his hometown is called Aschersleben. And when you Latinize it, it becomes Ascanius, and it comes from that mythological person Ascanius who escaped from Troy. Most of you probably know the story of the Trojan horse, where they have that fight, and then there were some people escaping after. So he was one of these escaping person and became a big king in that Roman mythological. And so I wanted Askanya in Creole to be the new queen of chocolate in Haiti. So a little mythology, but in reality, let's make the hubby happy. Yes, to do the business, you have to call the business my hometown name, fine. And it kind of sounds very Creole, very Haitian too, so it worked out perfectly.
That is awesome.
Totally. And I don't, my kids were screaming and clamoring for chocolate and cheese when you first started, so I may have missed it, but Corinne went to the University of Michigan, so, we're proud of that. Go Blue. And again, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure, my pleasure. And thank you for the many goodies. I feel honored, and I have to hold on myself not to eat them since yesterday. So yeah.
Well, you
Now
have
it's time to dig
more
in.
self-control than a 4-year-old. So it's a low bar, but it's still something to be proud of.
Okay, perfect. So I hope everyone enjoyed their bar and their first course.
Absolutely. Friends, I thought that was an amazing course, and thank you so much for a little bit of that story. I'm so happy to have met you in this virtual world and gotten to hear that direct from you. I want us to hold off on opening it up for tasting notes until we get another course under our belt, so to speak, and then we'll do a quick guide through our tasting kind of language that we use, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that. So let's move on to course 2, if that's all right with everybody. Cool. Awesome. For the second course, we're going to have Idyll Farms, another one of the wonderful mother producers in our lineup. Amy Spitznagel actually decided to open up Idyll Farms when she started to have young kids. She thought the idea of raising her family with this beautiful farm landscape behind their upbringing would be really special. And so they bought this gorgeous 200-acre farm up in northern Michigan, and they have a closed herd. So they're a farmstead operation. They're raising the animals and making the cheese, and it's a closed herd in the sense that they're using their own genetics. They're not buying genetics from outside. And their herd is mostly alpine and Nubian goats. They're really beautiful. If anybody likes pictures of little animals and stuff like that, especially during early spring, during kidding season, you can see a lot of beautiful animals. But Idyll is one of our favorite people to work with. We've done a lot of stuff with them. In this case, we have their honey lavender goat cheese. And so, similar, the texture on the first 2 cheeses is this really fluffy, beautiful texture. The Idyll Farms is hand ladled, each cheese, and that just lends itself to that delicate texture. I really enjoy the honey lavender. The fact that they're lavender buds, I think always gives the lavender a little bit more, maybe a quieter or a turned down volume than if they were lavender oil. There's something a little bit more savory about that application, and I've always appreciated that that's what they do. And then obviously the Michigan honey sweetens up the whole thing. But go ahead and give that a try. And we're pairing that today with a beautiful chocolate from Montreal. And this one's pulling with a bunch of spices from the Silk Road from Qantu. But Will, what do you have to tell us about this chocolate?
This is one of the newer bars we started carrying from Qantu. Is the screaming loud?
It's audible, but I don't think it's just that loud. You're fine. And for a Mother's Day tasting, it's just real life.
Yeah,
so it's perfect.
Just tell me.
All good, Will. It's real. It feels good.
There you go.
Qantu's just making exceptional chocolate out of Montreal. And for those of you, some of you may have tried it on previous tastings. Husband and wife team. Husband's French Canadian, the wife is Peruvian, so they've got a dedicated focus on Peruvian beans. And they make a fantastic lineup of single origin bars that are just from different regions within Peru, but they do some really beautiful, inclusion or flavored bars. And I mean, just looking at the back of this bar with the rose petals on it and the spices sprinkled across it, they've done a gorgeous job with it. The chocolate's very, very clean and smooth with added cocoa butter. So it's more of that traditional like European style that they're making. And it's definitely not, it's not subtle, but it's not, it doesn't overdo it with these spices. You can certainly go overboard with this spice mixture, especially when you get into rose and, fennel. But we thought that this would be really fun to pair these kind of bolder flavors with the Idyll Farms goat cheese. And the Idyll, in this case, the cheese is more acidic than the cheese is more acidic than the chocolate. So it's interesting. And I also found that this pairing was one where hitting the right balance of ratio to chocolate to cheese. You can try it with a bite where the cheese is a lot bigger and the chocolate's smaller, and the acidity of the cheese will really take over. But if you get a smaller piece of cheese and a little bit more chocolate, I think you can strike a really beautiful balance with the two.
I'm so happy you brought that up, Will. I think that, always with pairings, that ratio matters, but we've done a fair amount of cheese and chocolate pairings. And I think it's, it's more crucial than it is with a cracker. I'd say that, it really can make a difference. I'm going to give a little visual. I'm curious just to calibrate with everybody here. What I'm kind of doing in terms of a ratio, like with my first one, is that I'm almost using it as a cracker of some nature, but I'm doing something like, I don't know if this is going to be so visual. I'm going to come up real close here. Whoop. Pieces like, ooh, where's the camera? Like that. So there's, a nice chunk of chocolate, but there's almost an equal amount of cheese on that bite. Will, do you agree with that kind of a ratio?
I found my personal sweet spot to maybe be close to 50-50, or maybe even a little bit chocolate heavy, but definitely not more cheese than chocolate. In terms of like rough size, approximate sizes.
Yeah. And I encourage you guys, as you're kind of getting this information and thinking through the pairings, play with that. It's another variable. So as we're going to start talking about the pairings and invite you guys, I'd love to hear what flavors you're tasting. I just want to run through how we talk about pairings internally at Mongers Provisions. We've worked with a scale. I mean, I've been using it for about 12 years, and it is a -2 to +3. And so a lot of you guys have heard me run through this, but -2 as a barometer, you guys know -2. We've all had it. It's that orange juice in the morning after I've brushed my teeth, and all of a sudden we have a really clashing experience. I'm hoping nothing's a -2 tonight. A -1 is one thing is less than it would be by itself. So if you tried one of the cheeses and it just all of a sudden tasted off, but the chocolate tasted fine, it'd be a -1. Once again, hopefully no negatives. 0 is when you have a neutral experience. You just chewed them. They existed together. I didn't feel some profound interaction. I think this happens often with mindfulness, right? When we're eating in our everyday lives, we don't think about pairings because we're running around, right? We're doing a lot of different things. A +1 is the reverse, right? One thing starts to taste better. If you really loved how the goat cheese added acid to the chocolate and all of a sudden the chocolate tasted really good, but the goat cheese just was acid, maybe it's just a +1. The cheese doesn't matter. It's just about the chocolate. A +2 is when everything just starts to get a little bit better. And that's where we're hoping tonight, that these flavors do a dance and just elevate the experience, and we get to +2s. And then those +3s, they're culturally significant. It makes a big deal when you hit a +3. I've been studying food my whole life, and you hear about the same +3s over and over. Stilton and port wine, foie gras and Sauterne. And so, +3s, you don't have a lot of chocolate and cheese +3s. They're not as common. we've been doing this set of pairings since I think it's our second pop-up. So we back to 4+ years ago, Will and I started doing this, and we popped up in a chocolate shop. And the first pairing, or I'm sorry, the first event, people were like, "What's the pairing?" And we're like, "I could see how you expected us to have one, but no, it's just this is a chocolate shop, and I have a bunch of cheese here." And by the second time, we started to come up with more language around it. But we love pairings. We think it's fascinating to kind of take these flavors and put them together and see how they change. I'm curious. I saw some notes flashing. Benji, has anybody jumped into the chat? Is anybody brave enough to talk through what they've tasted so far?
There's a lot of people who are really excited about what they've tasted. So you have both 1 and 2 have been at least +1 or +2 in Jillian and Mike's mind. Val Marie says they exist beautifully together. Megan Brudney is mixing courses, Qantu and Nocciolo. So you have some really good, unique tastings out there, and people are really seeming to enjoy these different mixtures of flavor.
Beautiful. And, although I'm obviously biased to Megan, I think that's a really brilliant idea, and I'm really happy she brought that up. This is what we thought went really well together, but you guys have 4 beautiful cheeses and 4 beautiful chocolates. They're going to go together, right? And so mix and match and see if you can find different flavors. I'm sure it'd be interesting to look at like how each chocolate expresses themselves differently against each cheese. I'm sure there's different data points there. So play with all the combinations. Go off script. If you find any +3s, just let the group know. Are we ready to go on to the next course?
I think so. Yeah, no questions right now. Just a lot of people. Another +2 came in for that second pairing. So I think people are just trying a little bit of everything right now.
And remember, try the wine. These first 2 pairings are where the wine, I was like really surprised at how well it worked, right? We were looking at a Chenin Blanc that really felt like pretty background music, and this felt like it added something, some sparkling conversation, if you will. Okay, course number 3. I think we've had some really cool kind of appetizers, some sweetness, some acid. Now we're going to go to the savory course. Taleggio is a really beautiful cheese coming from the Lombardy region of Italy. So it's I invite you to play with your food always, but it's a pudgy cheese. It's such a fun, fun bouncy texture. Taleggio is a cheese that gets into this category of washed rind cheeses. So some people think of these as sticky cheeses or funky cheeses. If you find the rind to be scary or off-putting, trim it away. You're still going to get a lot of flavor without it. If you like to try those things, and if you like things with a little bit of texture, almost the texture that the Askanya bar had, the rind's going to have that similar kind of texture. It's a fun cheese, and it adds a lot to it. These cheeses, when you say funk, they're not going to be barnyard. They're not even going to be like horse saddle. They're going to be like fermented, right? And I know that all sounds silly, but there's different levels of like funkiness. Some things taste like a cave, some things taste like a cellar, some things smell to me like Napa did during harvest season. There is this smell of like a whole community fermenting grapes all around the same time, and Taleggio always reminds me of that. It has just that like sweet breakdown smell. It's really a fun cheese. It melts very well. It's a great way to add quite a bit of flavor to like a pizza or a mac and cheese. And in this case, we have a really fun chocolate that I've been slightly obsessed with since we brought it in. Will, what can you tell us about this new chocolate? We've only had these guys for what, like a year, maybe?
I don't even know if it's been a full year. I feel like we started carrying them maybe mid last year, like sometime around last spring or summer.
Okay.
But Cuna de Piedra means cradle of the stone, or kind of like cradle of the earth. And they're, kind of like Askanya, it's one of the few companies where the chocolate is actually being made in the same country where the cacao is growing. They're up in Monterey, which is in northeastern Mexico. So there's no cacao grown that far north in Mexico. Monterey is, around 100 miles from the Texas border. but they're getting a lot of cacao down from the area around Chiapas and Oaxaca, down in the far south of Mexico. And again, similar to Askanya, they're really focused on using locally sourced ingredients, even when it comes to their inclusion. So they, they partner with a cooperative operation that grows hibiscus for a bar that they've got hibiscus flower in. And this bar with mezcal is coming from, one of the villages. I can't remember the name of it. Zach, did you go to this village?
I don't believe I've been to that exact spot.
Santiago Matatlan.
No, I'm familiar with it. Because it is a very well regarded, part of Oaxaca, but I don't believe I've been to it.
So they're using that Mexican mezcal. They've got a couple different bars with mezcal in it. They've got a joven, they've got an añejo, so a young mezcal and an aged mezcal, different percentages, and then they also have some single origin chocolate as well. But very fun company. They're doing cool work down there, and we hope as things settle down, that would be a good one for us to go visit. Megan Brudney says some fruitiness to it as well, and the smokiness from the mezcal is a revelation. I definitely agree. And when we were, this was a tasting as our team was kind of coming up with ideas around these pairings, and we decided that we wanted to do something Antilegio. Lena and Kim, two of our managers, and they're amazing people and fantastic. They have fantastic palates and they're creative. They came up with the idea of this, and I tasted it, and they laid out the stuff, and I tasted it, and we were talking through it, and they're like, "So what do you think?" And I was like, it's interesting. And they're like, "So you don't like it?" And I said, "No, I didn't say that. It's just, I think it's thought provoking. It's a flavor that I keep wanting to taste to see how I feel about it." This combination. And we thought about going with something a little spicy with the Taleggio. In this case, Cuna de Piedra also makes a spicy bar that's got smoked chili in it, and not super spicy, but we ultimately decided to go with the mezcal, a little bit more subtle and less just kind of off the deep end, weird in all the directions. Not that that is something that we wouldn't ever do, but I ended up liking, even as I tasted it this time, tonight when I tried it again, I thought, you know what? I've decided I really like this. I like the combo. I love the Taleggio. I like the chocolate with it. Again, Mitzi, I see you're saying the chocolate overpowers the cheese. Again, play with the ratio. In this case, try a bit more cheese, try a generous portion of cheese and a tiny bit of chocolate and see what you think, right? Because,
or make sure you include the rind on this bite if you missed the rind last time.
Yeah, you can definitely find a balance with most of these pairings. If the first one that you try seems off in some way or another, go to the opposite end of the spectrum with the ratio of which two you're trying together, and you might find something completely different. It's really remarkable how different it can be. Does anyone else have any? Do you have a question, Mitzi?
So, one thing that's popped up, someone mentioned the third course is nutty, and they can see why it goes into mac and cheese. Do you guys have any, these are some unique chocolates and unique cheeses, anything you would cook together with kind of that chocolate flavor, and especially with the smokiness of the mezcal or the cheese, anything that comes to mind that you could combine with any of these courses, including, the lime from Askanya? There's a lot of really unique things that can be done here.
Yeah, I think that there's some really cool work to be done in that way, in implementing these in different ingredients along a meal. Um, Will, historically, one of the things, to speak for Will, that I know you like to do with chocolate is to do a dry rub on roasts. And I think, you could do a really cool dry rub with, especially the Mexican chocolate and, a Taleggio cheese sauce if you wanted to do a quite literal um, meal with these things together. But I think that playing with them, even as they kind of exist as different flavors and notes, is yeah, I think there's definitely some fascinating ways to implement them. Will, do you have any ideas that kind of come to mind?
I mean, honestly, it would be a little pricey to do it with Nocciolo, but I think you could make a killer chocolate, key lime pie cheesecake type thing with the Askanya bar. You know, by the time you add a bunch of cheese to it, you might need to grate in a little bit of lime zest or something. But I definitely think that there's some synergy there that could work quite well. And then you could, someone came into the store the other day and they were talking about making different cheesecakes, both sweet and savory,
Yeah.
And I think again, the Qantu chocolate, or doing a goat cheese cheesecake that's, on the less sweet side of things, but still has some sugar to it. I think you could do some really fun stuff with that. Cooking with, savory cooking with the bars of chocolate themselves can get challenging because you've got cocoa butter and sugar in there. So when I do it, I often, like for the dry rub that Zach's talking about, I often am using cocoa powder for that because it's much easier to use than chopped up chocolate, and you're not worrying about, burning chocolate over the course of a long smoke or something like that. But, there's a lot that you could do with the chocolate and cheese concept. Even with the Taleggio, I'm not a creative enough. I'm not a pastry chef, first of all, period. And
That's the other Will Warner.
I'm not creative enough to come up with the idea off the top of my head, but I think that you could definitely do something fun with the Taleggio and the chocolate as well. My thought on that would be some sort of really weird ice cream that you'd find at at Buy Right or someplace like that.
Totally. I have a memory, I've been lucky enough to judge the Cheesemonger Invitational several times. And one of the things the Invitationals, like marquee events, is the perfect bite, where people take a cheese and design the perfect canapé or appetizer. And there was a woman who received perfect score, at least for me on it, where she took a cheese and she took chips, fried them, tortilla chips, fried them, cinnamon sugar, and then she piped cheese that she had whipped with a little bit of creme fraiche onto that, and had shavings of chocolate. I think making a dessert with some of our cheeses and using our chocolates as shavings would be another cool way to do it. But we encourage you to have fun with your cheese and chocolate. If you come up with any recipes, we'd love to hear about them. Has anybody, I guess, does anybody have words for, like, I know, Megan mentioned some fruity and the smoky. Is anybody finding new flavors as they bring these things together that they're surprised to taste, or finding that there are flavors that they didn't like before that really kind of soften or change in a way that they find, delicious?
We did have some people who said, like the wine really popped with that third course right there, a little nuttiness to it. Understanding why everything kind of worked together there, and I think the wine is a very interesting point too, of how that is mixed in with cheese, chocolate, and wine all together, and trying them both individually, as you kind of mentioned earlier.
Yeah, it's a lot of different kind of things to play with, and it almost makes you sit back from our normal meals where we're having all those things happen without giving it the attention that we're giving to tonight. I think it's really fun to add these things and try them together and think about what the wine does. I also want to just highlight, one thing Will said about like the thought-provoking nature of some of these. I think that there's something for, I often use the term thinking cheese versus snacking cheese, right? And I think especially when we're having pairings like this is supposed to be thought-provoking and not necessarily, it's not cheesy popcorn where you just throw it back. It's something a little different. So I like how he framed that. I also just want to say that, we're talking a lot about the flavors, but I think that especially with these pairings that we've had so far, there's a textural component that's really significant. I mean, especially in the very first course. But I think that the way that different textures of cheese kind of yield to the different textures of chocolate can be very interesting. Is there anything in the chat before we talk about the fourth course? And of course, we're still here for a little bit longer to talk about everything, but anything?
Yeah, we had a couple interesting things. Val Marie added some red pepper jelly that works really well with the third course, and also some strawberries as well. So, those different fruities, and even I tried the apricots with a couple of the courses as well, which really kind of popped there with that dried fruit, extra little sugar. So some really cool pairings going on beyond just, the recommendation.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess also before I jump into the last chocolate, we're kind of glossing over some of the things we normally talk about, which is, usually we give a little intro into chocolate. And I think most of the people on tonight's tasting have tasted with us before, but, real quick before we talk about the last chocolate, because there's a lot in the last chocolate and its sourcing. And Corinne brought up some of this before, but, I think it's important to remember that chocolate's grown really in a narrow area, 20 degrees north or south of the equator. So we can grow chocolate in Cuba, but not in, southern Florida. And Will and I, really Will's our chief chocolate officer, and he's designed this beautiful chocolate selection. And we're so focused on craft chocolate. And I think it's really special when we can apply these words like terroir that you find in wine to chocolate. And we've tasted chocolates from distinct regions tonight, but I think especially with the Cunha de Piedra and the Askanya, we have two examples of, to me, like the coolest kind of opportunities we have in chocolate, which is to tell the story of where the chocolate's coming from with the inclusions. I think chocolate covered almonds are delicious no matter whose chocolate you're using. But when you can tell me that, limes grow in your area, or that there's this unrefined sugar rapadou that we tend to use, or that mezcal is this amazing agave distillate that's found throughout Mexico, all of a sudden you're telling me a lot more about your chocolate and your history and your culture than just, hey, isn't this dried fruit covered in chocolate delicious? And so I think these are really cool examples of inclusions. I'm just really enjoying them personally. Are we ready for a fourth course? Or Will, do you have anything to add to that? I saw you smirk.
We did have a mention of someone, Gigi was not a big fan of the flowery flavored, but the lavender cheese mixed with that Qantu bar really became one of her favorite pairings. So you can see how just
cool.
the flavor profile really changes.
That's very cool. Great notes. Okay, friends, let's go to fourth course here. Unless, Will, do you have something? I saw you unmuted.
Was that Gigi or Bryce who doesn't like the flowery flavored things?
It's Gigi.
All right.
Bryce is okay with flowery things. Yeah. I'm the one who I always try his like lavender lattes, and I'm like, no, I don't know why you do this.
Bryce. He's a big teddy bear with an open mind.
There you go. That's why we love them. All right. So for the last course, we're rounding it out kind of with something familiar. How like many good desserts are, they take you back to, simpler times and delicious flavors. The first one is House Select Cheddar. I love House Select Cheddar, but I have to say our staff loves House Select Cheddar. This is a perennial favorite. And I feel like if we don't see House Select Cheddar for more than 6 months, I hear about it. People are like, hey, maybe we should bring in, people like this cheese. It's the same maker who makes Dunbarton Blue, if anybody's had that. Chris Roelli out of Wisconsin, really nice guy, makes amazing cheeses. And I think the name says it all while saying nothing at all, right? It's House Select Cheddar. It's just like good everyday cheddar. Obviously, that annatto color makes a striking, beautiful color. Annatto is the dye that we use in cheese, and it's the same thing as the achiote seed. It's a seed that gives you a ton of color with very little flavor, maybe a hint of sweetness, some people would say, but there's pretty good debate going on whether or not you can taste a natto seed. And it isn't quite a cloth bound cheddar. That's a thin layer of paraffin that you see on the outside, but it's really a fun crumbly cheddar and incredibly snackable. And then a chocolate bar from Ghana, which, I was just talking about this kind of tight, narrow band where chocolate's made. And, it's important to remember, Corinne mentioned the labor issues in chocolate, and, plenty of the places that make chocolate still have major issues with slave labor or child labor. And, 75% of the world's chocolate comes from Ghana. So there's a familiar flavor in this chocolate, but luckily with the partnerships that Letterpress makes, we're able to enjoy chocolate from this region, that's ethically sourced. Well, what can you tell us about this chocolate? Sorry if I stole any of your thunder on that. I just thought it was interesting.
No, not at all. I mean, we've been hearing more and more in the last several years about labor practices in cacao growing and sourcing. I recently read an article about Tony's Chocolonely, which some of you may have seen that company around, and their whole thing is using ethically sourced chocolate, but then they're kind of like, yeah, well, we're working towards that. It's a goal, but we haven't accomplished it. When it came out quite recently that quite a bit of their cacao was really sourced from the same places that, Mars and Nestle are sourcing from. So it's a really big problem, and it's part of why if you come into the store, 70% plus of the world's cacao is grown in the Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire region. And this, I think right now is the only Ghanaian bar that we have. And not to say that there aren't other quality craft chocolate companies making, making chocolate from ethically sourced Ghanaian cacao, but, we've decided to carry one or two. We rotate through them periodically. There's something about pretty much all the Ghana cacao that we get that just has that familiar note to it, that because it's so many of the beans that we're used to trying are coming from that country and that region, and they're coming from Forastero varietal cacao. It's the flavor profile that we know when we think of chocolate. It's the chocolatey profile, the fudgy profile. And a lot of times at the store, we're trying to set things apart. We're trying to catch your attention. So we're carrying bars that have weird ingredients in them, or are bright and fruity, or, maybe are more raisiny, or, aren't what you expect. But there's something beautiful about chocolatey chocolate, right? It's not a bad thing. We have no problems with chocolatey chocolate. And Letterpress has done a great job highlighting this. This bar just hits those notes. It's not super bright. It's fudgy. It's smooth. It's a husband and wife team out there in Los Angeles. One of the few companies that we carry that actually makes kosher certified chocolate. For any of those of you who care about that, we do sometimes use Letterpress when we're doing events with some of the various Jewish organizations in town when we need a kosher chocolate. And they do great work with this bar. I think that this pairing is super fun, and again, very, very ratio dependent, because the House Select cheddar's amazing, but it's salty, right? Mm-hmm. If you get a little too much of it, the salt in this case, the cheese totally overpowers the chocolate again. Whereas we've had chocolates that overpower the cheese. Megan, the kosher prosciutto is fantastic. You should. Zach's actually got a pound of it in your fridge right now.
Not true.
But you know, the ratio definitely matters, and I think that this pairing works great. I also just tried the mezcal with the House Select. Talk about crossing the pairings, and I think the smokiness of the mezcal bar with the House Select cheddar it's like +3 territory for me right now. So
It's so funny that you just said that. I was literally swallowing that bite as you brought attention to that. I had just tried that pairing and it's fantastic. Benji, I see the chat going wild. What else do we got in there?
Yeah, totally. We got a lot of really cool stuff. So we'll go back to the original question before I go down. Mel and Trev asked, is it aged much? If so, how long? I assume referring to the cheddar.
Yeah, House Select is it's probably going to be less than a year. I bet it's at the 10-month mark is my best guess.
Yeah, no, cool.
I believe that's correct. I think it's generally a 10-month cheese, you know.
Yeah.
10.
We have a lot of people who going back to this original pairing of number 4, how exquisite it is. You know, Megan says +7. You had Jen and Jason say +11, but there were a lot of people, you know, +10. Like a lot of people really just saying how much they love that cheese and chocolate, how much they were made for each other. You know, this pairing is great. They both have such a classic flavor for what they are, but together they taste like something totally new from Cameron and Lauren. So really, really cool as to kind of what's happening there. You know, a lot of people think that this, you know, Val Marie says, great 4th course pairing. I'm over cheddar, but it gives me a new appreciation for the cheese. I think you're seeing things like that and just how these pairings really work well together. You know, one of the cheddar kind of reminds me in some ways of, you know, maybe you could talk a little bit about how did apple pie and cheddar become this great pairing in its own sense, that you see not as common anymore, but back in the day for sure.
Yeah, actually, when Will was talking about the cheese and chocolate cheesecakes, I kept thinking about the cheese and apple pies. I think Matthew, one of our coworkers, has done the House Select cheddar for the cheese and apple pie from Sister Pie. There's a recipe. I don't know the history of that, and I'm excited to do a little research on it. It's definitely very English. Will, I believe you grew up in a house where that was celebrated, right? That's how you enjoyed your apple pie?
It's my dad, who was on the call, almost always would eat his apple pie with a little bit of cheddar.
Yeah, it's such a nice flavor combo. That's awesome. Michael, I don't know if you know any history about it, but if you do, feel free to unmute yourself and educate us. But besides that, it's just delicious. But yeah, I think that that's one of the more classic applications, and this one definitely screams for that. Benji, what other question?
Yeah, totally. What would you say in terms of, you know, so I know you guys have just started talking about kind of mixing and matching some of these chocolates and cheeses. Have you guys come across, so you mentioned there's a potential +3 in there, you know, anything that you guys have toyed around with now that you've done this tasting, you've gone through all these cheeses and chocolates, anything you would go back and mix and match and either change differently or pair differently next time?
You know, I really thought that Will's very right that cheddar and the mezcal bar are really cool. But for me, that a lot of pairings, they had ideas that they kind of brought forth that I don't know that I would want to lose. And so for me, the Taleggio tends to be aged on wooden boards. And I felt like there was this like line of the woodiness that the Taleggio brought that I got in the cedar aged barrels that the agave is aged in before it's distilled. Like there's a note that plays all the way through that's really interesting. And, you know, similarly, the first course to me was such an experience of key lime pie, between the texture having that graham cracker thing and kind of expressing that idea. I think those are really fun ideas, but I do think that it's nice to mix and match. The mezcal and cheddar blew me away. I didn't expect that. And I do think it's you know, for flavor, even if there's not the story there, it is perhaps a better tasting. Some of the other pairings that we've done in the past that we've really enjoyed that, you know, we didn't do tonight is the blue cheese. Blue cheese goes incredibly well with dark chocolate. There's so much flavor on both ends that there's some really cool things that can come out of that. Will, what about you? Do you have any other combos or things and different approaches that you want to kind of talk about in this?
You know, there are certain things that are kind of easy to pair because they're so good sometimes. And this Ghana bar, I thought, you know, the Ghana bar would go well with a lot of these different cheeses. But we also tried it with Comté, which is another one of our favorite cheeses, and it generally is really good with a lot of stuff. And to me, it was like a total -1, you know.
Really?
And maybe I would feel differently, you know, revisiting it, but so we opted for House Select, and I'm really happy that we did. But I would have thought that you could pick the Ghana chocolate and like almost any cheese in the case, and it would work pretty well. But there was something about the chocolate with the Comté that just like brought out all the garlic flavor in the Comté and nothing else. And I personally, no offense to companies who make chocolate with garlic in them, whose name shall not be spoken, do not like that combination. And I like garlic, and I like chocolate, but that was like where that pairing headed for me. But you know, no, I'm pleasantly surprised with this, because every time we decide to do one of these things, Zach and I always have this moment of panic where we're like, oh, what are we gonna do? It's kind of hard, you know, like finding combinations that are really good is kind of hard. But to his point, I really like that there were ideas behind these pairings, not just trying to like find perfection, but we were trying to find things that were synergistic and had some sort of concept behind them generally, with at least the first three. The fourth was just like, these are two delicious things that go together, was really the idea there. But, you know, I like the intention behind the other three, and I'm, you know, quite pleased with it.
We did have a couple things that came in. So
Oh, the rind.
From our Rabbi Chat Master Megan, you know, she doesn't usually like dark chocolate, but trying it with all these pairings is waking up in a new way. Mitzi, thanks you for the wine choice. Val Marie shared a wonderful board she made. Megan has a question. We're still curious about the rind. You know, talk about, you know, especially this final rind, as well as the Taleggio rind, if you have any kind of insight on that.
Yeah, you know, all the first two cheeses, well, I should say the first cheese has a rind. You probably don't even notice it, but it's a very thin rind, and it's mostly geotrichum or geotrichum, very thin, and you almost can't taste it, but it has a little bit more yeasty, salty kind of quality. It's delicious. The second cheese is fresh, so no rind. The third cheese, the Taleggio, that like rusty or salmon color peachy rind, that's where you get this term washed rind or schmear ripened cheese. And that's a cheese where you're actually conditioning the rind with salt water or alcohol, in this case, salt water, and it doesn't create an environment that's very conducive to mold growth. And in the absence of that mold growth, you get a specific bacterium, Bevibacterium lineum, B linens, that grows and gives it that rust color. So it's totally edible. It's part of that experience, but some people don't like the grit of that. And then the last cheese, you see it has this kind of like beautiful blue kind of little specks of mold, but it is separated by a thin layer of paraffin wax. You know, Chris makes some really beautiful cheeses in his space, including the Dunbarton Blue that I mentioned. So there's a lot of blue flora in the air. And I think that's part of the reason they decided to paint this cheese with a wax rind. This way they're able to, it's not so thick that there's no oxygen escaping. It still ages and gives you this crumbly texture, but it's not permeating the flavor too much. Otherwise you'd get a really bluier flavor. And I bet, without actually having a chance to visit, I was supposed to go last March, that Chris doesn't have such a large facility where he could age the Dunbarton Blue and the House Select in separate rooms. So they have to coexist, and he has to protect this cheese from not going blue. And so I think that that's why you have that thin paraffin. If you've already eaten that rind, do not be concerned. It's a food safe paraffin wax, just like your manchegos and things like that. But there is a little bit of a barrier there.
We do have a question if she's willing. Corinne, a couple of people have asked like what your thoughts on this cheese chocolate combinations, and we assume it's not something you do every day of taking cheeses and mixing them with any chocolates.
It was my question too.
Good question. I don't usually do it, and just between you and I wasn't a big chocolate fan, just to be frank. Like, I just got into the chocolate business because I wanted to make it different. I thought, why not chocolate? But so I've been enjoying it like everyone. And I think it's Megan who said that she's not a big dark chocolate person, but this pairing has been very delicious. Well, it's the same. I'm discovering these flavors. They are so tasty. There's a couple of +5 and +3 for me too. So great idea. Already thinking if I could get some of these boxes as Mother's Day present or Father's Day present, because they are great. So that's a question for you guys, because I really enjoyed it. And even without having, I think the tasting is even better, but even without the tasting, I think this will be a great present for Mother's Day. I mean, Haitian Mother's Day is at the end of the month, so a couple of my aunts could receive it later, so it's not a problem. But for Father's Day also, these will be excellent choices.
Well, thank you so much for that. And, you know, most of our boxes, if it's products that we have available, we're always happy to send them after the tastings and send a link. Sometimes we buy these cheeses as just one-offs for these tastings, and in which case we just don't have it available. This one's potentially still available. I think we could make this one happen again in the future.
And I'm sure even if you choose a different selection, they will also enjoy it. So I'm not concerned about having this or that bar, whether it's a letterpress bar or some from another company, but it is delicious. Excellent.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we do have a Father's Day event coming up, since you mentioned it, and I always forget to mention these upcoming tastings. We have Going Ham. We're going to explore some different charcuterie options, prosciutto, serrano, the kosher prosciutto we'll mention, different ham options, and, you know, celebrate fathers who make cheese and things like this. And of course, we always have our various packages available online. But yeah, that one went live today.
Excellent.
What other questions, Benji? Or Will, what do you have to say? Sorry.
If a pig wears a kippah, is it kosher?
There's a lot of people who can weigh in on that in this call.
We have the Carps family still waiting for that smooge pairing.
It's
coming.
In the store.
It's a good product. If anybody has heard, smooge is a, how do they call it? It's a sparkling fruit puree. It's like sparkling
smoothie seltzer.
Smoothie seltzer. Thank you.
Yeah.
Way better. I'm glad I didn't name that product.
Yeah.
Either way, it's really cool. You should try it. They'll at the store.
For the third new flavor of Secret Smooge that just came out. And then we can do the smooge pairing.
Secret Smooge. Oh, I didn't know about this.
Back to the pie subject, I think that the cheddar takes the apple and cinnamon, and when you add the cheddar, it makes it so much more than just kind of apple candy in a pastry. The saltiness just kind of takes it to another level. But I had a grandfather who would take apple pie and put cheddar with it, and he said it turned it into peach pie.
I dig it. I love salt and sweet. I think it makes a lot of sense.
You get 2 pies for the tasting of one.
There you go. I like it. It's family history of pairings there. I like it. What other comments do we have, friends?
A lot of people kind of mentioning second course was a favorite. We have a bunch of people with the fourth course is the favorite, so a lot of cool mixture there. You know, Wendy, who was just talking chocolate at the end of the meal, helps the brain to signal the body into satiety, and the cheese to encourage anti-cavity process in the mouth. So always good that you're helping people's gums and teeth right now. You know, really appreciate the cheese and chocolate education. 2 of my favorite. Never thought to pair the 2. Thank you for this presentation from Val Marie. Going to be up for a while after the 70% cacao. So a lot of A lot of fun comments. I think, not everyone thinks of these kind of things mixing together, but obviously we are a cheese chocolate shop. And so it's always good to show that they can coexist.
Yeah, and I also want to just highlight that, I appreciate everybody talking about the novel idea behind it and how it's different. And I just want to say that, like, it's different for Will and I too. And it's actually the reason we're here for the second time doing a tasting like this is because of the questions you folks ask, right? If it wasn't for you guys, we wouldn't probably have sat down and tried to do the road work or legwork, so to speak, to find these pairings. And I'm just so thankful that you guys kind of always encourage us and push us to take the craft a little farther and try these unique combinations. And I'm so thankful that you guys find it interesting enough to try these. This is I think this is up there with like our canned fish kind of tastings. This is not for the faint of heart. So kudos to all of you guys. Thank you for being here and enjoying this wonderful tasting with us, and continue to let us know what you're interested in and what you guys want to explore, because that's how we find the coolest stuff.
I'm going to buy some.
Belle Marie says she's going to buy some suspenders now. Are you selling any cheese suspenders at the shop yet?
Ooh, that's a good idea. We got to talk to Carhartt about doing, a kind of mashup and getting some Mongers suspenders in there. I'm loyal. I only wear Carhartt most of the time. Every once in a while I wear a novelty pair, but yeah, coming soon, Mongers suspenders.
Can't wait for MD3.
MD3. what's
Mother's Day 3.
that?
Mother's Day 3. I love it. We'll continue to do these. Okay, friends, does anybody have any other questions? Are there any other tasting ideas? And I love that you guys are throwing up which course is your favorite. So please continue to do that. I'm really curious to look at those later.
Perfect. Yeah, just people thanking us for the combination. Happy Mother's Day to all. A lot of people, this is their start of their Mother's Day weekend with a gift. So so happy people enjoy. But I think it's back to you, Zach, and I think we are you can wrap it up as you please.
I think
Awesome.
there was a comment in here though that my daughter and son-in-law are here having a year. You guys have done a lot together and having joy in the years of the pandemic. I mean, we're very, very fortunate. We're very grateful to the gods, to the powers, translated into you guys to make life a pleasant journey.
Well, thank you.
Again, a silver lining in all of what we've been through. And
well, thank you very much, Wendy. And we're so thankful to everybody, and especially to the mothers, on such a wonderful weekend. And it's such a well-deserved and important weekend. Honestly, everybody works so hard, and we're really thankful that we've come through this pandemic in a way that we've gotten to share so many experiences over the last year with so many of you guys, tasting wonderful products, and that this is our reality. Of course, we'd love to be in person with every one of you and have a big table in reality where we could all share a meal, but we're really lucky that instead we get to connect with people in Brooklyn and people throughout Michigan and throughout the country, and get to share this experience. And so Will and myself and Benji and the rest of the Mongers crew, we're just so appreciative for all of you guys for choosing to spend your time this way. If you guys keep showing up, we're going to keep doing these events. Please let us know what you want to taste, and how we can elevate your table. But just thank you so much for being part of the Mongers crew in your own way. And I hope you all have a wonderful night. We'll be on here for a couple more minutes as we sign off and break down. But thank you guys, and check us out on YouTube and all the other different social media outlets, and stay tuned to new tastings. And yeah, thank you guys for participating.
thank you.
When Zach says break down,
Whoop. You're mute.
so when Zach says break down, that doesn't just mean disassembling the cheese board. He's going to be crying momentarily. It's just part of what he does.
The laughter will fade to tears, and it's true.
Well, I would like to say thank you for putting this amazing tasting together, because between making sure the flavor match beautifully and packing all these, shipping them, and doing the flavor notes, I'm sure this has taken quite a time So I wanted to thank you for your time, your energy, and your creativity in putting all these delicious flavors together and making us having a beautiful and imaginative night. Thank you.
Thank you, Corinne.
Thank you.
love your
Thank you
chocolate
so
as
much,
well.
Corinne.
Corinne, thank you so much for sharing. It's a pleasure, a wonder to meet you because I loved your chocolate the first time I tasted it. I tasted it and I thought, this is really good. This is really interesting to me. And I loved it. And then Will told me your story and I just applaud you totally. You followed your dream, your passion, just like Will and Zach following your dream and passion. And I applaud you and you make the world a better place for doing that. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Amen.
Wendy. Thank you.
Right.
I appreciate it.
And, bye-bye. Thank you. One thing I always like to say about Corinne when I'm telling people about Askanya in the store too is that, you know, like Corinne said, she's pretty frank about not having gone into this because she thought years and years she wanted to start up a chocolate company. But Corinne got an undergrad degree in engineering and then a master's degree in business. And so she wanted to create jobs in Haiti. And she looked at it like an engineer with a business degree and said,
An engineering problem, kind of like,
yeah,
okay,
what crops are
can we
Haiti's
put
growing?
there
Yeah.
and export? Yes.
And you know, beyond that, Haiti is primarily agricultural, right? Like what percentage
Yes.
of the Haitian economy is agriculture?
It's actually 60% of Haitian are subsistence farmer. What they mean is kind of like they grow a little of everything: mango, lime, cocoa, sugar, coffee. They eat it when it's in season, and then they try to sell the extra. The issue is like all their neighbors are going the same thing and everything is harvested at the same time. So when it's harvest time, there's very few outlets to bring the product to the big city because of the infrastructure issues. So hence the reason why when I was choosing a business, I was like, what crop can I transform? And it ended up being cocoa first, and then sugar as we add, and lime with this flavor. And we're coming up with an orange flavor. We've done a cashew nut flavor. And each time for each of these ingredients, we work with 10 and up to 2,000 farmers. For the cashew nut, it's 10 farmers. For the lime, it's 5 farmers. For the sugar, it's 200 farmers. And for the cocoa, we work from 500 to 3,000. The 500 from whom we buy wet beans that we ferment and dried. And actually, I don't know if I said, our bean came top 50 at the Salon du Chocolat in Paris, which weigh cocoa beans every 2 years for the quality of their beans. So our beans in 2017 were named among the top 50. So anyway, to come back, we work with 500 farmers where we ferment and dry, and another 3,000 from whom we buy directly.
Amazing.
It's so cool.
Thank you. And so one thing to help people like us, like farmers who work directly, or chocolate makers who work directly with farmers, one good thing is to actually read behind or read. The first thing is to read what they say, where the ingredient comes. Do they say if there's an origin? If there is an origin, that means they're an origin. Like the Cuna de Piedra is from obviously Mexico. Our bars is from Haiti. So that's kind of like the first thing to check. Well, okay, are they using some Mars, Nestle cacao that comes from any area, or is it really a single origin from a group of farmers that we can pinpoint? That's one good thing to do. And look also at the ingredient. Okay, can you read the ingredient? Cocoa, sugar, lime, or is there a bunch of things you can't name, you can't read that looks like a chemistry course? Then you know, like, there's an issue there and there's no, like, we're not supporting the right thing, and it's potentially not that great for our body too.
I always like
my 2 cents.
No, I always like that test. The can I pronounce all the words in the ingredients list test is a really good one. When, you know, me who doesn't have a science background, it's definitely a good measure.
Yeah, and one thing we don't do often, but that it's great even for the chocolate. I mean the cheese is to smell it, because it's a sense. It's like, it's the way it looks, it's the way it smells, it's the way it snaps. So smelling the bar and seeing what you smell. Do you smell cocoa? Do you smell flowery? Do you smell fruity? So these are good things. So it makes it a full sensory experience.
Amen. I love it. I love it. All the senses. Well, thank you for helping us engage all
Thanks
of those
so much,
tonight,
everybody.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your night and let us know how we can help you in the future.
And again, happy Mother's Day to all the moms here.
Woo. Happy Mother's Day.
Thanks, Mongers.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Good night.